Some people have said that my method of fly fishing with a lure and 2 flies behind it is illegal. Well, it's illegal in certain states that only allow 2 flies or lures on your line. I think Wyoming and Montana, all popular fly fishing states, only allow 2 flies or lures on your line. So when I'm in that situation, I don't fish a lure and 2 flies, I fish a lure and 1 fly, or something like that. But there are a lot of states where you can fish a whole bunch of things on your line. Wisconsin and Minnesota, those states both allow 3 flies or lures on your line at a time. Michigan allows 6, yes, 6 flies or lures on your line at a time. That's a real party there. Down in the southeast, states like North Carolina, Virginia, West Virginia, they don't even have a limit. You can have as many flies on your line as you want. I don't know why you would want to, but you could do that if you wanted to. You need to check the local regulations and make sure whatever you're doing is legal. Don't get yourself in any trouble. Now, when I am fishing in an area that allows only 2 flies or lures on my line, I got a couple options. Number 1, I can fish a spinner with 1 fly behind it, and that's a pretty good option. That works pretty well. I can also fish a spoon with 1 fly, but what I really like to do, I like to fish a spoon with 2 flies behind it, and I take the hook off of the spoon. And then the spoon is not a lure anymore because it doesn't have a hook. It's just a casting weight. A casting weight with 2 flies behind it. When you do this, you don't want the fish going after the spoon and hitting the spoon because there's no hook on it. You won't catch the fish then. So what I do is I use a green spoon. Now, my favorite green spoon for doing this is probably a 1/10 ounce Swedish pimple, but you could do it with a Daredevil as well, or any spoon of your choice. Just if it's not green, you want to make sure the whole spoon is green. So usually only one side of the spoon is painted. The other side, if it's a flashy metal color, get some fingernail polish or lure paint or whatever, and just paint it green. Paint it a bright green so it looks like a leaf that just fell into the water. I am convinced that the reason why trout do not hit these brightly colored all green spoons is because they look like a leaf. They don't want to eat a leaf, so they stay away from that. It works really well. I fished a green spoon once for an entire season and I never caught 1 trout on it, and I had a hook on it too. I then learned after a while that don't use green unless you don't want to catch a fish on it, which sometimes that is the case. One of the things I like to do with my little Eppinger Daredevil spoons is I'll take the treble hook which is on the spoon and I'll reduce it from a treble hook to a double hook. I'll use a little wire cutters and I'll cut off one of the points on the treble hook. A spoon, all spoons, ride through the water with the painted side facing downward. So the part of the treble hook, the point of the treble, which is on the same side as the painted part of the spoon, that is the side, that is the point which also will be pointing downward and be more prone to getting snagged. So by removing that one point, you're reducing your snags on your spoon considerably. Now you might wonder, is that going to also reduce the odds of hooking a fish? In my experience, no. I've had just as good success hooking fish on a double pointed hook behind a spoon as I have had on a treble hook behind a spoon. The one issue I don't have with a double hook that I do get sometimes with a treble hook. The treble hook sometimes I really hook the fish in the mouth and it's hard to get it out sometimes. I still get it out, but it takes a little bit longer sometimes, and the longer the fish is out of the water, the more stressful it is on the fish. When you release your fish, you want your fish to live, right? Or why release it? So anything you can do to help that fish get back into the water a little faster, it's going to help the fish to live. In reducing your treble hook to a double hook, it will help the fish to live. It also help you to keep your lure from getting snagged. Let me give you a little tip, which isn't necessarily related to fly fishing with a spinning rod, but you can still do it when you're fly fishing with a spinning rod. When you go dry fly fishing, a dry fly fisherman, it's a little bottle of floatant that they add to their dry fly. It helps it to float better. Well, eventually these little bottles, which they fit very conveniently in your fishing vest, eventually they run out, they run empty. And instead of throwing my little fly bottles away, I fill them up with crawfish oil. A little crawfish oil is very nice in my vest. Now, all fish love crawfish oil. So sometimes when the fishing is getting a little slow Now, you have to be careful where you do this. You gotta obey the regulations, obey the laws. Some places don't let you do this. I add a little drop of crawfish oil to my little fly, and all of a sudden the fish, they may not have been feeding before, but they usually feed afterwards. It works really well. It doesn't work well everywhere under all conditions. I find that if I'm fishing a fast-moving river, then it's either a combination of the current, which wipes the scent off, or maybe it's the fact that the fish in the fast-moving river have to make fast decisions. They don't have time to smell the lure before they hit it. You just see it moving and they just hit it. So scent never really made much of a difference when fishing a fast stream. But if I am, let's say, fishing a couple nymphs underneath a floating crankbait, and they're floating kind of slow, especially if I'm fishing a lake or a pond or a slow-moving stream, adding a drop to a fly once in a while really can make a difference. It's almost like fishing live bait. So if you're fishing in a place that doesn't allow live bait, then you can't do that because it would not be allowed. But it can work really well. And really, you're still fishing with artificials. I mean, you're still using a fly, and it just works well. So that's a little tip for you, and hopefully it helps. Let's talk about rods, spinning rods. My favorite rod to use for fly fishing is this nice 6-foot graphite ultralight spinning rod made by St. Croix. It's a good rod company. The 6-foot rod, it's general, all-purpose, kind of works well for all situations. It's probably my go-to rod. But there are times when I need to cast a little extra far, and if I want to cast really far, I like to use this 7-foot rod. Again, it's a graphite ultralight rod, and it casts, a 7-foot rod is always going to cast farther than a 6-foot rod. If I'm fishing a pond or a lake or a wide river, I will use this rod here because it casts really far. Also, if you're fishing dry flies, you know, you usually got a long leader on a dry fly. You got your floating crankbait, and then several feet later, you've got your 1 or 2 or 3 flies behind it. A longer rod just makes it a little more easier, more convenient to fish a long leader behind your lure. So a 7-footer for dry fly fishing works pretty well. One problem I sometimes have with a 7-foot rod is usually they're very whippy, very kind of a slow action, a lot of flexibility in them, which is probably necessary because a long rod that is stiff might be more likely to break. But there's a problem sometimes if I'm casting a lure with a fly or two behind it, the act of casting it with all the wobble of the rod, you've got the lure, and then you've got the momentum of the flies behind it, it tends to affect casting accuracy. It does not affect casting distance very much, but the accuracy with this rod, the 7-foot rod, it's not as good as what I would get with a shorter, stiffer rod. If I'm fishing a small or medium-sized stream, I tend to not fish this rod because it doesn't cast accurately enough for those smaller streams where you need a pinpoint accurate casting. If you're fishing a pond or a lake, you're looking for distance, not accuracy. When you're on the smaller streams, accuracy is critical. And then I go down to a 6-foot or 5.5-foot rod. If I'm fishing a smaller stream, I might go down to 5.5 feet. Probably also I'll fish maybe a lure and just one fly behind it because there just isn't much room to fish in those situations. You know, small streams, you got less maneuverability, less room to cast, and 5.5 feet, it helps. It's a little easier than a 6-foot rod. If the stream is too small for a 5.5-foot rod, then I'm probably on the wrong stream. I probably need to go fish somewhere else. One of the things I like to do when I go out trout fishing, a lot of times I like to hike out into the wilderness, out into the backcountry, maybe 1, 2, 3, sometimes 4 miles. And when you hike that far, you don't want to be carrying the rod in your hand. You want to put it in your backpack. So I often take with me then this rod here. It's a 5.5-foot graphite ultralight pack rod made by St. Croix. It's a pretty good rod. It doesn't have as good of an action as a typical 2-piece rod because it's a 4-piece rod. But it has good action. It's still plenty fun to fish. And gosh, when you take it apart, it gets so small, so tiny, very, very easy to throw it in your backpack, and you can hike and you don't even know it's in your backpack. Really, really, really small. What I like to do sometimes, I'll get to a stream And if it's a stream I have not fished before, I don't know exactly what conditions I'm going to encounter. So I'll bring my little pack rod with me, my little spinning reel, and I also like to bring my little Tenkara fly rod with me, because sometimes I actually like to use a real authentic fly rod. Although this is a Tenkara fly rod. It weighs 2 ounces. When it's collapsed, it's about 18 inches long. It extends out to 11 feet, so it can get pretty big. They're both so small and so lightweight, I put both of them in my backpack. I get to the stream, and then based upon what I find in the stream, I can choose which rod do I want to use. Sometimes I use both of them. Not at the same time, but at the same day. Sometimes I'm out there fishing with my fly rod, and all of a sudden the wind picks up. It gets too windy, and instead of hiking a mile back to my car, I just pack up my fly rod, my little Tenkara, put it in my backpack, get out my spinning rod, which I brought with me, which was in my pack, and I use this. Spinning rods are really unaffected by the wind. It doesn't matter. It can be 30 miles per hour out there, and you can cast just fine with a spinning rod. So having a really collapsible pack rod like this, when you go out into the back country, very convenient.